The topic of old games that still look good is an almost endless one. The last video ended up being a lot of fun, but of course it couldn't include every single game that I thought was over 10 years old and looked good. The comments were really interesting to read through. Some people suggested games I saved up for future videos, while others mentioned games I've never heard of, which I thought was a really cool thing. In this video, we'll be doing the same thing as the last video, which you should watch by the way if you haven't yet. Remember that good is subjective, so that means a list such as this can never really be complete. Also, all of the games talked about in this video, or indeed the last, are ones I have experience with personally, so don't be too upset if you don't see one of your favorites in here. The Witcher. The first Witcher game was a surprise success when it came out in 2007. The developer, CD Projekt Red, had never really made a game outside of some Polish translations, but then came up with this somehow. Oblivion might have been the more talked about RPG at the time, but I don't think it aged particularly well. It's so overdone with the colors and also the bloom effect, but a lot of people, like me, didn't see it like that at the time. It was more seen as hyper-realism in a way, I guess. Oblivion does not pass the "it looks real if you squint your eyes" test, while The Witcher does. The details in the models or textures might not be the best today, but the general look, as well as the colors, is what makes the game still look great today. Another thing that isn't exactly graphics, but is something you see, are all the people going around. Even though a game like Oblivion has NPCs, all with their own lives and schedules, The Witcher feels more real somehow. Towns and cities look more lived in, and they're just more people, so it just looks more, busy and lively. The Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. Minish Cap is my favorite looking 2D Zelda game. A Link to the Past looks great to me, but I think Minish Cap is a great example of what sort of things you could do to make two-dimensional games look really good. The art is cartoony like the Wind Waker, but I think it translates rather well. I think it looks better than the DS games, certainly more refined. The colors are fun and vibrant, the animations look nice, and the shading adds a lot of depth that isn't there in, A Link to the Past, which is more flat. This is again one of those games where the art style is very much intact. Depending which region we're talking about, it was either this or Four Swords Adventures, which ended up being the last 2D Zelda game to be released. Uncharted. Here's another relatively modern game, and that is Uncharted, the first one for the PS3. I always believe the Uncharted games to be good, mindless fun. It's pretty linear. Everything you can climb on stands out so much that you don't even need to think about where you're going, and things like when scenery collapses is done in the most predictable of ways. Not to mention the banter between the characters is atrociously bad and overdone. It's this sort of Hollywood action movie style where everyone somehow needs to one-up the other person they're conversing with. And then they have that sort of sarcasm that you get from a person who thinks they're witty but they actually aren't. Also, if you look at the game's graphics, they look pretty good, don't they? There's a good amount of detail in the environments. In fact, I think the world design looks excellent. There's a wide variety of exotic locations, which give you a Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones vibe all at the same time. No wonder the new Tomb Raider games ended up with Uncharted-like gameplay. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. Stealth games have always appealed to me, and one I used to play all the time was Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. Even though it's probably been a decade or thereabouts, I can still remember the general layout of many of the stages. As always, it's the PC version that looks the best, though the Xbox version was the best looking of the console games. It's also noteworthy to mention that the PS2 game didn't look as good, and even had different looking stages, like the layout was different. I'm not sure what the GameCube game looks like, but anyway, this is the PC game we're looking at here. Even the earlier Splinter Cell games look great, but Chaos Theory took everything to the next level. I think that has to do with the bump mapping. Can't really remember what graphics card I had back then, but I remember having to update my drivers because it wouldn't display properly. I'm not really sure why that memory stands out particularly. What Chaos Theory did well, in terms of graphics compared to previous games, or in fact other games of the era, is how surfaces look against light sources. Instead of just featuring a texture, the bump mapping gave even more depth to the objects, whether it's to give the illusion of a wet surface or just, to give a texture to stone or brick. Of course, the lighting is worth mentioning too. I love games that play with light sources, and obviously here it's part of the gameplay. Splinter Cell Chaos Theory is one of those games that marked the transition between early 2000s 3D games to what 3D AAA games look like today. The main difference being that everything is more refined now, and things like resolution, textures, and all of that stuff has gone up as well. Super Mario World. We talked about a bunch of late 2000s stuff, so let's get a bit more old school with Super Mario World for the Super Nintendo. 16-bit graphics really have the potential to stand the test of time. And while something like Star Fox and Mario Kart can look their age, something like Super Mario World somehow still looks great today, at least to me. Again, it's the art style that saves the day once again. Everything looks cartoony and vibrant in a way that the older 8-bit NES Mario games don't. This game is a very good example of working with the console's limitations to come up with something that looks great in ways that games that try to look realistic can't. That being said, I think it's important to give credit to games like Star Fox for trying to push the capabilities of the system. Perhaps one day we should talk about games that were ambitious in their day, because I think that would be a lot of fun. But that's going to be it for today's video. There's still plenty of other games to talk about, so we'll save those for another time. Remember that these videos aren't ranked lists. Nothing is in any particular order. The main point about these videos is to talk a little about games that aren't in the spotlight at the moment. Like the video if you did, and subscribe if you haven't already. Check out Patreon if you want to help the channel grow as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.